when you handed this over, this stack of stuff on Islamic finance and then blockchain technology, I got to say, I wasn't really sure what to expect.
Right.
But
Yeah.
this is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really is interesting to see these two kind of complex systems, each with their own sort of rules and intricacies.
Yeah.
Starting to kind of bump up against each other and see how they might actually influence one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we're going to try to unpack here, because on the surface, you wouldn't necessarily put these two things together, right?
Right.
So to kind of kick things off, we have this lecture by Dr. Farrukh Habib.
Yes.
Who, talk about being in the right place at the right time.
I know, right?
He's a scholar of Islamic finance, AD, blockchain. So
yeah.
It's like we've got a guide who speaks both languages.
Exactly.
So what were your kind of initial takeaways from his talk?
Well, it was interesting because he really kind of framed this connection between these two worlds, not just about like, oh, here's a technology that can make things more efficient, but really about how do we align, the technology with values.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Unpack that a little bit.
Well, Islamic finance at its heart has a very strong ethical dimension, right? It's about fairness. It's about shared risk. It's about investing in a way that benefits, society as a whole.
Right.
And what Dr. Habib is arguing is that blockchain, with its transparency, with its ability to sort of automate these complex agreements, could be a really powerful tool for actually realizing those values in a more concrete way.
Okay. So it's you're right. It's going beyond just making things faster or cheaper or more
exactly.
efficient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he actually gave a really compelling example with smart contracts.
Yes. Okay, tell me, when you hear smart contract, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
It sounds very futuristic,
You
right?
sound like
a little bit sci-fi.
It does, yeah, for sure.
But really, at its core, a smart contract is essentially a self-executing agreement, right? So you're basically coding all the terms of a contract onto the blockchain.
Right.
And then once certain conditions are met, everything else just kind of falls into place automatically.
Yeah.
You don't need these intermediaries. You don't need all this paperwork.
Right. And because it lives on the blockchain, it's incredibly secure, right?
Exactly.
And transparent, which is, a huge deal in any industry, but particularly finance, right?
Yeah. And I think that's where you see this really interesting synergy with Islamic finance, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the core principles of Islamic finance is avoiding excessive uncertainty.
Right.
Or ambiguity in financial transactions.
Okay.
Which can lead to disputes or one party unfairly benefiting at the expense of another. And what smart contracts can do is because you've got these predefined rules, because you've got this transparency, it can actually mitigate that risk and make things much more straightforward.
So it's not just automating processes, it's actually building, like we said, that ethical element
system
into the infrastructure itself.
Yeah, I like that.
And it gets even more interesting when you think about, how Islamic finance views risk and reward, right? Unlike conventional finance, where, interest is really the primary driver,
right.
Islamic finance emphasizes these profit and loss sharing arrangements.
Okay, so it's more about partnerships and everyone having a stake in
everyone's in it together.
The outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Dr. Habib was suggesting that, blockchain could actually make those types of arrangements more transparent.
Right.
Easier to manage.
Yeah.
Especially as we move into, a world with these increasingly complex financial instruments. And this is where, tokenization and fractional ownership come in.
Yeah. Towards the end of his talk, he started talking about this.
Yes.
And this is where things get potentially really transformative, disruptive even. Right?
Yeah.
Imagine if you could represent ownership of real estate, for example,
on
the blockchain.
Right.
And so suddenly, instead of needing, these huge sums of money to invest in a property, you could own a tiny fraction.
It's like taking a big pie and dividing it up into,
exactly
millions of slices.
Exactly. And because these digital tokens, right, that represent that ownership, they can be traded really easily on a blockchain platform.
Right.
It creates more liquidity in markets that were traditionally illiquid.
Right.
And that could potentially open up these really exciting investment opportunities to people who might not have had them before.
To a much wider range of people.
Yeah.
And again, that lines with this idea of
The financial inclusion.
Financial inclusion.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. We
Yeah.
got, blockchain potentially making Islamic finance more efficient, more equitable, more accessible.
Right.
It almost sounds too good to be true, right?
Right, right.
So were there any sort of downsides or challenges that he highlighted in his talk?
Well, yeah, I mean, he did touch on, the complexities of ensuring that these technologies are implemented in a way that adheres to Sharia,
Right.
to Islamic law.
Right.
And
Because it's not always clear cut, right?
well, exactly. And the principles of Islamic finance are fairly well defined.
Right.
But there can be, different interpretations and different schools of thought when it comes to specific financial products and practices.
Right. So it's not as simple as just like slapping a blockchain on
Exactly.
an existing Islamic financial product and saying, okay, we're good.
It requires careful consideration. Yeah, yeah. And I think some healthy debate within the community as well.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so that's an interesting kind of thread to pull on because we have these other sources as well that speak to some of this.
Yeah.
So what else did we have on the list here?
Well, we've got that article from the World Economic Forum,
Right.
the one titled, "Can Islamic Finance Principles Make Blockchain Technology More Equitable?"
Yes.
And it really kind of jumps into this whole social impact potential that we've been talking about.
Equitable is a big word.
Yeah.
What's the WEF's take on how this actually plays out?
So they're arguing that Islamic finance's principles, particularly this focus on risk sharing and real assets,
Right.
could act as a sort of ethical compass for blockchain development.
So it's not just assuming that any application of blockchain
Right.
is going to automatically benefit
Exactly.
everyone equally.
Right. They highlight how, if blockchain is driven solely by profit,
Right.
it could actually exacerbate
Right.
existing inequalities.
Make the problem worse, yeah.
Right. But if it's developed with these Islamic finance principles in mind,
Yeah.
it might be possible to create a more level playing field.
Got it.
Yeah.
So less about the tech for tech's sake, more about tech aligned with
Values,
with values, yeah.
And they actually give a really interesting example with microfinance,
Right.
which, you remember Dr. Habib was talking about Blossom Finance.
Yes,
That's,
yeah.
using blockchain
Right.
to provide Sharia-compliant financial services to underserved communities.
Right. And this WF article, seems to be suggesting that this could be scaled up
Exactly.
massively.
Massively, yeah.
Yeah.
They argue that blockchain could significantly reduce the costs and complexities of microfinance,
Right.
making it feasible to reach even more people
Okay.
who are excluded from traditional banking.
So imagine a world where your access to credit
Right.
isn't determined by your zip code
Exactly.
or your credit score.
Right, but by,
Yeah.
your entrepreneurial spirit or your community standing.
Your character. Yeah.
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 Interesting.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a future I can get behind.
Right.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Right.
Because we also have that report from the Islamic Research and Training Institute,
We do.
the one called Blockchain and Islamic Finance: Challenges and Opportunities.
Yes, and they were not shying away from the hurdles.
No, they weren't.
Right.
No, they weren't at all.
They were getting into
The nitty-gritty.
getting in the weeds of what needs to happen
Yeah.
for this to actually work.
Okay, so hit me with the biggest challenge.
Okay.
What's the main thing standing in the way of this,
Right.
blockchain Islamic finance revolution?
Well, I think one of their key points was this need for greater standardization
Okay.
within Islamic finance itself.
No, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Didn't Dr. Habib say that Sharia law is adaptable
He did.
and open to interpretation
Yeah.
when it comes to financial matters?
And that's part of what makes it so interesting, right?
Right.
But
Okay.
what the IRTI is arguing is that flexibility,
Okay.
while a strength in many ways, can also be a bit of a challenge
Okay.
when it comes to integrating with blockchain.
Because you need a common language,
Yes.
a set of universally agreed upon rules in order for those smart contracts to actually function.
Exactly. Across different platforms and jurisdictions.
It's like trying to build a house where every brick is a slightly different size and shape.
Exactly.
It's
Aesthetically interesting, but
it's not gonna hold up.
structurally unsound.
Yeah. Okay, so standardization is key. What else did they flag?
Another big one was ensuring that, the underlying assets being traded or tokenized on a blockchain platform actually comply with Sharia law.
Right, because it's not enough for the technology itself to be neutral.
Exactly.
It's what you do with it.
Right. And verifying the provenance and the Sharia compliance of assets.
Right.
Especially as we're talking about things like, fractional ownership of real estate or commodities.
Right.
Can get really complex.
So it's not enough to just have a digital record of ownership.
Right.
You need to be able to track that ownership all the way back to its source.
Yes, absolutely.
And make sure every step of the way it's been on the up and up.
Transparency is great.
Yeah.
But you need those robust
auditing mechanisms.
Auditing and verification mechanisms.
Verification mechanisms, yeah.
Yeah, to make sure this actually works.
Okay, so we've got standardization.
Yep.
Asset verification.
Yep.
What else is on the radar?
They also brought up data privacy and security.
Okay.
Which, might seem a little counterintuitive.
Right, because we think of blockchain as being...
Right, tamper-proof.
Tamper-proof, yeah. So what are the concerns there specifically with Islamic finance?
Well, because Islamic finance places such a strong emphasis on ethical conduct.
Right.
And fairness.
Right.
Not just in, financial transactions themselves.
Right.
But in all aspects of business.
So it's about more than just protecting people from fraud or theft.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
about respecting their privacy.
It's about respecting their privacy.
And making sure their data is used responsibly.
Exactly. And so, the IRTI report really stressed that this needs to be factored into,
From the beginning.
The design of these platforms from the ground up. It's not just about the technology. It's about how it's implemented.
It's about the governance.
And how it's governed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And this is reminding me of something else that Dr. Habib touched on.
Yeah.
This idea that integrating blockchain with Islamic finance isn't just a technical challenge.
Right.
It's a cultural one.
It's a cultural challenge as well.
Yeah, and that's where I think our final source, this interview with a blockchain developer based in the Middle East, offers a really valuable on-the-ground perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's hear it.
Oh.
What kind of insights did this developer have to share? So we're talking to a developer, right? Someone who's actually hands-on.
Yeah, the trenches.
In the trenches building this stuff.
Yeah.
So what's their big takeaway? Is it just build it and they will come?
It's funny. He actually talked about encountering, a certain degree of skepticism.
Okay.
Even resistance.
Really?
Within certain segments of the Islamic finance industry.
I'm surprised. I mean, wouldn't everyone be excited about this?
Right. You would think so.
Yeah.
All these potential benefits.
Yeah.
But it turns out that change, even when it's, potentially disruptive in a good way, isn't always universally welcomed.
Interesting. So what's the source of the hesitation?
Well, it seems to be a combination of things.
Okay.
He was mentioning that some of the more traditional scholars, institutions, they're a little bit hesitant to embrace a technology that they see as potentially at odds with, centuries old traditions, interpretations.
So it's that classic tension between
innovation
and tradition.
Yeah, the old guard, the new wave.
The old guard, the new wave, yeah.
And the thing is, this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate. Right. This developer is dealing with the very real challenge of how do you bridge that gap?
Right.
How do you demonstrate to potential clients and collaborators that this technology can actually enhance and complement the principles of Islamic finance, not replace them or undermine them?
Right. It's one thing to talk about the potential of the technology in the abstract.
Exactly.
It's another to get people to buy in, especially when you're dealing with something as deeply personal.
Yeah, as faith.
And culturally significant.
Oh, finance.
Yeah.
I mean, those are big ones.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, on a more practical level, he was also talking about the challenges of finding and retaining qualified talent.
Because it's a very niche.
It's a very niche thing.
Skill set.
You need people who understand the technical side and the
blockchain side.
And
the Islamic
and in jurisprudence.
Yeah, jurisprudence side. Right.
It's not like there's this huge pool of Sharia compliant blockchain developers just
exactly
kind of waiting to be hired.
Right. So the training programs aren't quite there yet. The training programs are still catching up.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's that chicken and egg thing.
It is.
You need the talent to build it, but you also need the industry to be there.
Exactly.
To justify training those people.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And this is where, he argued that supportive regulation is absolutely crucial.
Because it creates that sort of like...
It creates the ecosystem.
Where investors, entrepreneurs feel confident.
Exactly.
Jumping in.
Yeah, it gives them that level playing field. It gives them the guidelines.
Yeah. Interesting.
Wow. Okay, so we went from the high level.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did.
Yeah.
The high level principles of Islamic finance and the potential of blockchain.
Yep.
To the very real challenges of standardization.
Yeah.
Of asset verification.
Yeah.
Of this cultural
bridging the cultural divide.
Right.
Yeah. And the need for talent, for regulation.
It's a complex landscape.
But
incredibly
high.
Its stakes are high.
Yeah.
It feels like we're just kind of scratching the surface of something that could be.
Right. It feels like we're just at the beginning of something.
Really transformative.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like, this isn't just about technology or finance.
No, it's bigger than that.
It's about
values.
It's about using these tools to create a more just
like solve real world problems
and equitable financial system.
I love that.
One that actually aligns with
our values.
With our values.
Not just profits.
Not just profits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listener, it seems like you've handed us a puzzle with a few pieces missing.
Right.
But that's what makes it so fascinating, right? It feels like we're just getting started.
Yeah, there's so much more to explore here. If I were you, I'd be keeping a close eye on this space.
Yeah.
Because the next few years...
This is going to be interesting to see.
I think are going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe someone listening to this will be the one to connect the dots.
Right. To crack the code.
To crack the code and really kind of change the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So fascinating stuff. I'm really glad we got to dive into this.
Yeah, me too.
This was great.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And listener, we will catch you on the next deep dive.